Welcome back, friends. So, uh, today in this third lecture, we are going to look at the sound patterns of English, a part of the generative phonological tradition. So, among the various schools of phonology, generative phonology is the most well known, or used to be the most well known till optimality theory came along. So it is a standard theory against which most of the other work has been measured and judged. And this is primarily a branch of phonology that came into prominence due to the work of Noam Chomsky and Maurice Hall, who published the sound patterns of English in 1968. The aim was to eliminate the redundancies and certain uh, you know dichotomies and that had come into the phonetic theory at that point of time, and the phonological analysis they proposed was supposed to be based on the phonological rules which were sacrosanct. Now, at present, the more focus is usually put on the theoretical nature of this work, but at the same time, it is also supposed to be one of the gold standards against which many other theories are judged. So, what is generative phonology? So, continuing from his earlier tradition of generative syntax that was introduced by Chomsky in his Syntactic Structures, published in 1957. Generative denotes the capacity of any grammar to define a set of principles and thereby to define the set of all grammatical sentences, all perfectly well-formed grammatical sentences that could be possible in that particular language. So it is an approach in generative linguistics where the aim is to establish these sets of rules, principles, and parameters or constraints that are efficient in producing these surface phonetic forms of a language and to model the internalized linguistic structure or linguistic knowledge that is the I language. It is a central idea in linguistics research throughout the 1960s that this framework spawned many more developments in phonological theory, and it is a component of the generative grammar that assigns correct phonetic representations to utterances in such a way as to reflect the native speaker's internalized grammar. Now, this particular phonological approach was proposed by Chomsky and Hall near about the end of the 1950s, but it took them 7 or 8 years to build on that and publish the now seminal work called The Sound Patterns of English. And this became the tenets of this particular theory came to be known by its acronym called the SPE, and the SPE model became the standard model for quite some time. So it is basically built on Trubetskoy's idea of phonetic opposition and also borrows from Jakobson's idea of distinctive features. So it's basically a kind of a hybrid theory, but at the same time there are a lot of aspirational novelties that characterize this particular work. So, as against the earlier period of structuralism in the Americas, especially Bloomfield's work and Sapire's work, was basically to describe the phonological or morphological model in which the words were seen as linear sequences of morphs. Say, for example, a word like girls or boys would be looked at as girl plus boy, girl plus S, and boy plus S. So S representing the plural morpheme. But it does not explain, according to many theorists, words which are irregular. Suppose you have mouse. How do you explain the word mice? Or say, for example, you have a word like sheep, and the plural form is also sheep, but you do not have any overt exposition of that, the plurality. So the model that generative phonology came to spawn was that the abstract phonological representations that changed into a phonetic representation by processes like deletion, addition, change of sounds, etc., became paramount importance, became of paramount importance in this particular model. So in this model, the relations between words are seen as processes of derivation rather than a simple description. For example, the verb made is the product of the derivation process where the velar k changes into an alveolar da. So make becomes made. So there's a change from k to da. So similarly, the word took is the product of a derivational process which involve a vowel change from take to took, a to u. Now, in generative phonology, it's actually different from the approach of structural phonology. In structural phonology, you have three levels of representation. One is the allophonic or the phonetic, the second one is phonemic, and the third one is morphophonemic. The allophonic or phonetic level offers a more or less accurate transcription of the actual speech event. And then at the phonemic level, only the contrasting speech sounds are represented. The allophones all coalesce into a singular representation. At the morphophonemic level, however, every morpheme has a unique representation where there's a morphophoneme that abstracts over the plural morpheme, as in the case of cats and dogs, etc. The plurality gets absorbed into the system, but it's a morphophonemic abstraction that takes place. Generative phonology differs from this aspect in emphasizing that there are basically two levels of representation, the underlying phonological level and the surface phonetic level. The underlying level comprises of a set of phonological rules applying to the underlying forms to yield a surface phonological representation. Like you have, say for example, the phrase structure rules, which is tied up with a lexicon, and then you have the phrase marker rules. There are transformational rules which lead to the surface structure, and the surface structure has two components: the phonological rules and the semantic interpretation rules. The semantic interpretation rules are part of the logical form, which form the semantic representation, whereas the phonological rules form the phonetic representation in the grander scheme of things. So, the major contribution of Chomsky and Halle to the study of phonology is this SPE being an attempt to build the description of English phonology based on a transformational generative theory of language. Chomsky and Halle in this attempt to state explicitly the phonological rules that will underlie the speech sounds of native English speakers. So it is regarded that the defining text of generative phonology, which has established the standard framework that there are abstract rules that determine the actual acoustic output from speech events. These rules apply sequentially to produce a series of derivations that result in an abstract representation of the phonemic representation in the first place. And the phonetics consists of a series of segments that could be exhaustively defined in terms of sets of binary features. So this set of binary feature is a very, very important concept that comes primarily from the distinctive features, and the contribution of the rules that are strictly, that the rules are very strictly ordered. So there is no deviation from these rules. Accordingly, the phonological representation are considered as sequences of segments that are made up of distinctive features. So we need to understand what these distinctive features are. So in my next lecture, in the next video, I will look at the various definitions of distinctive features and how they're established as part of the SPE model.